Long Range Shoes Utah. We got a special treat today. We were at SHOT Show 2019. My good buddy David Tubb. This guy is an absolute legend in the shooting world. Google him. You'll be very impressed. If you've heard of the 33XC, 37XC, but surely the 6XC, this is the guy that invented it. So David is like PhD level when it comes to reloading and shooting. So what I'm hoping to get him to do is kind of boil it down for the layman's terms guy, and which is challenging because this guy's been at it for how long? I mean,
a long time.
A long time.
Got gray hair from it.
Yeah, he's been doing this longer than probably twice as long as I've been alive or close to it. So he's way up there. But what I'm trying to get him to do is really give us the basics for the average Joe. If I'm going to go out and reload and do load development, how should I go about doing that? And he's going to take his best shot at it. So starting out first, picking the right brass is important. So
well, you've got your rifle. Theoretically, you've gotten your barrel broken in.
Yep.
And you want to use a piece of we're going to use a 6XC. You want to use a piece of good brass. So, Norma or Peterson makes a good piece of 6XC brass. I typically, when I got the brass in, I'm also going to desire to shoot a particular bullet. Let's say I'm going to shoot 115 grain DTAC. That's what I want to shoot in my 7-twist new rifle I've got.
Let me ask you a question there, because a lot of guys are like, what bullet should I shoot? What powder should I shoot? And what I normally direct them to do is go to Berger's website and use their stability calculator and say, well, what twist rate of the barrel do you have? Because a lot of guys don't realize that you can have a 300 Win Mag with 3 or 4 different twist rates, and not all bullets are going to work.
That's right.
Especially if they make a varmint version of that gun, it's probably got a lot slower twist than the typical would.
That's correct. Well, I'm assuming that you have a factory gun, or you've got a new barrel from a gunsmith.
Sure. So like a 6XC would be like a 1 in 8 or a 1 in 7.
That's
twist.
right. 1 in 8 or 1 in 7, and typically the 30 caliber. An 8 or 9 or a 10, let's say, a 6.5 somewhere in there also, somewhere around 8 or less. Anyway, so I would pick the heaviest bullet or one of the heavier bullets in that line. And why is that? Because it's going to give you more downrange performance, especially in the retained energy, and as far as the wind drift, it'll be less.
You can have a higher ballistic coefficient.
Absolutely. So what would I do? I'd have this new piece of brass. I would go in and I would probably run it in my expander die, my resized die, just enough to uniform the neck of the case. So that means I didn't run it all the way in. If you're going to run it all the way in, if you desire to do that, put a little bit of lube on it so it comes out, and wipe the lube off when you're finished. Say I expanded the neck. I very well might take a little hand tool and deburr the ID of the neck.
What's the ID of the neck?
The inside diameter of the neck where the bullet goes, right in there.
Engineers.
Right there. And so at that point in time, then I would take that brass with or without a primer, depending on my reloading setup. I might be putting my primers in. I might be putting it in when I'm loading it in a progressive press. But
so he uses a Dillon 550 for most of your stuff, right? Most of us will probably use probably a lot of guys do a single stage because they're more inexpensive.
But if you put your primer in it, and either way, if with or without the primer, weigh your brass and segregate it into 1 grain increments. So you got
probably safe to say do it without the primer, just for sake of these guys.
That would be fine. And then at that point in time, all we're doing is giving you a weight range on that little 25 pieces of brass. So when you have a piece of loaded ammo, the finished product, you can weigh it again. And if it's within a grain, if all those 25 pieces are within a grain of themselves, you're off and running.
So that's
it's a safety check, double check, because you don't want to load a case with half full of powder. You don't want to load one that that half a charge of powder went in the other case, and now it's got a charge and a half in it, which wouldn't exactly probably happen.
Gotcha.
But you don't want it overload or an underload per se.
So generally, you're going to take it and weight sort it and do. You said like 3 buckets and say this one's 1 grain, that one's 1 grain, and just drop them in there.
Absolutely.
And then are you going to just load those together, or
right? I would when I put them in the box, I'd make sure they were turned up, turned down, marked on the back. Had something that kept the lighter ones separated from the heavier ones.
Okay.
If I'm going to shoot those 75 charges, let's say, all in one shot.
So if you buy a box of 100, and are you gonna only load the ones that are all within a grain of each other, or are you gonna just?
No, I'd load them all. It's just I would load the ones. I would keep them segregated as we did this, and you're going to weight segregate them each time. So when you bring them back and you decap them and you clean them and you polish them, then start over and weigh them again, because it's very quick to weigh. in those.
And if you
It
bought a
doesn't take long.
ton of them, if you bought like 300 or 400, you could just kind of say, all right, I'm going to put these 100 in
That's
this
right.
box and these in this box.
Absolutely, at that point in time.
Okay.
And then start with a charge. You can look in your reloading manual and start with a charge, and work up in half grain incrementals. You're going to shoot let's say you're going to shoot your test at 100 or 200 yards, and at the same point in time, you ought to have a gauge that will give you the distance to the rifling. It's all bored out in here, and it screws on it's a Hornady lock and load sort of arrangement. You push it in, you push the follower up, and it tells you when you hit the rifling.
So you can get those at like Brownells. I can put a link in the description there, but basically all it is just a case. They sell all kinds of different calibers, and they've essentially drilled out the back end and threaded it, and they've got a kind of a tube or a stick that screws into it, and it's got a center plunger. So you put this up in the chamber of your gun, you jam it in there good, and you slide that plunger, which pushes that bullet out until it engages or touches the rifling in the barrel. And then it locks in. You bring it out. You take your calipers and you can measure it, and that'll give you where you're going to touch those lands. And generally, you want to do that a couple of times to make sure you're getting a consistent measurement.
Yep.
Okay. So
and
now
then,
you've got the seating depth.
Then I would load if you've got your reloading set up at your house and you're going to the range. Then I want you to load these so that they're, let's say, 10 thousandths longer than the measurement you took. So we close the bolt, you're pushing these 10 thousandths into the rifling.
It's going to leave a mark on the bullet.
A little mark, yep. So I want you to load, let's say, half of your ammo test, the 38.5, the 39, the 39.5, the 40, the half grain incrementals, so that it's 10 thousandths longer than what you measured. And then I want you to load the balance of it, 10 thousandths shorter, actually 10 thousandths off of the rifling. So that would be moving the bullet back 20 thousandths. So you're either going to have it engaged in the rifling 10 or jumping 10. Now, of course, depending on the shape of the bullet, not to go too far, diverge, but some of the secant ogive stuff wants to jump 30 or 40 or 50 thousandths.
So what he's talking about there is really the shape of the bullet. So like a Berger VLD classic, it's got a really straight side to it. I'm sure you're dying here with the way I'm describing
That's
this.
okay.
Sure, but it's got a really flat, straight sort of a shape versus a rounded shape, right? So those tend to be a lot more touchy and difficult to find a good seating depth, where the old Sierra Match King that was kind of fat and rounded, those were really forgiving. So like a Berger hybrid is kind of a halfway in between. And with what's the DTAC? What's kind of the shape on it?
It's kind of a 12.
Like a hybrid?
It's kind of like 12 caliber ogive, so it's more forgiving. It's more of the forgiving Sierra shape, but it's approaching the secant shape. Let's say that way. Okay. It's kind of in between.
So one's got a higher BC, the other's more forgiving. So they're trying to find a happy medium.
The thing to know is depending on what you're doing too. Obviously, you're going big game hunting, or you're in an environment where you can't seat the bullet in the rifling. And it all depends on the amount of neck tension you have, whether you can extract that bullet and it stays in the case or not. That's something to bear in mind. But we're working on trying to develop a load. And of course, keep in mind the reason we're doing multiple powder charges is because the vertical component to all these groups, you want the ones that print 2 or 3 in the same sort of general area, because vertical is your powder charge. And then we talked about the seating depth, which is the horizontal portion of the group. Okay,
that's really interesting.
And so now we're moving it back and forth, and we're trying to take these two variables, these two simple variables, and get them where they match or made up, so that you get the best little round group you can have.
So generally, you're going to look at the reloading book, or you maybe do a little research with your friends or online and find out what's a good safe load that's not going to give me pressure, because you are jamming it in there.
Sure.
You're going to load up maybe 38, 4 of them or 3 of them at 38, 3 of them at 38.5,
right?
And then
you keep working.
39,
and if you get where you see a little silver round mark on the back, then you're approaching the pressure curve, because the ejector plunger, typically your rifle has, is showing you that there's a little brass flow in there. Well, then you don't have to shoot those bullets that you loaded further up with the charge. Take them home, and when you buy your reloading setup, buy a bullet puller, kinetic bullet puller, and you pull the bullets and dump the powder back in and start over.
Yeah. So a lot of guys ask about that, like. A lot of guys seem to want to push it right up to the very max of where the pressure is, and it seems like a lot of times you find more nodes that are good lower than you do up at that higher pressure.
Right.
Is that what you're experiencing?
Somewhat, yeah. And some people think there's a node. A lot of people think there's a node 100 feet apart or something. And of course, every barrel, they're all different, just like people.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
every
why
time you
you've
do
gotta-
that, you got to do a little testing to figure that out.
You've got to do it for your own rifle. You can't take somebody else's load and expect it to shoot great in your gun. Every gun is completely different. So one thing you said earlier that was really interesting is on these littler cases like the XC, the Creedmoors, and so on, you're going to go in a half grain increment. And then on the bigger ones, you're going to go a full grain increment when you're doing this testing.
Right.
I think a lot of guys, including myself, I'll go like, 39.2, 39.4, 39.6,
Sure,
and go that route. I'm really surprised to hear that you do such a big jump.
Well,
Is that because you're going to tune later with the muzzle
well,
brake?
that's because I'm going to tune later, and I can always go back and refine it.
Okay.
So let's just say the 39 or 39 and a half shot in the same, and then the 40 shot high, and the 38 and a half shot low. Well, I got 2 shots in there. Well, I could go back and load then 40, 42, 40.2, 40.4,
So you're
so
starting
on.
out here, and
Right,
you get a
yeah.
good one. It's sort of like a miniature ladder test.
That's right. It's kind of like painting. You make a wide brush stroke, let's say, to start with, and then you can fine tune it with a smaller finish brush. So.
Not to change directions, but what's your thought on a ladder test? Do you bother doing a ladder test at like 500, 600, 1,000 yards, whatever, to find those nodes, or you pretty much just do this?
I like to shoot ladder tests. I do shoot ladder tests occasionally, and I do them typically at 200 yards.
Interesting.
So because I don't have, at that point in time, I don't have a lot of conditions bothering me. But the thing is the ladder test between 200 yards and 100 yards is significantly better, because you can't really tell the difference when you're zeroing a gun between 100 yard zero, 75, and a 125 yard zero. But if you go out and you shoot your gun at 200 yards, you can really tell the difference between a 175 yard zero and a 2 1/4. So your ladder test is significantly more defining when you do that.
See, I've always heard ladder tests to do them at like 500, 600, 800 yards, but and I get that the environment starts, the wind and things starts messing things up, but really all you care about is the vertical spread, more or less.
That's right. Yep.
I'm surprised to hear that you do it at 200.
Yeah, 200 is a good spot to do a lot of stuff, I think. Yeah. So now that doesn't mean I won't shoot the same test, go start shooting my groups at 1,000, because that's typically where I go. But it's real easy. And the other thing you can do at 200 is you can see all your bullet holes very easily. And so you can keep track of stuff, because you're laying down there and you're going to shoot 20 shots, and then you walk back down there and you go, well, what was that one? You couldn't, the shots you couldn't see at 500. So anyway.
Okay. Cool. So we've done that. So you've gone and done the 1 grain or half grain increments.
Right.
And then we've done seating depth 10 in and 10 out.
Right.
And then are you going to go back later, just like you did with the powder charge, and kind of fine tune that and do the same thing with seating depth, where you're going to go 5 thou in, touching,
well,
5 thou
you
out?
could do that, but I think at the point in time, sometimes depending on the presses and stuff, you maybe not get all this. You get stuff that touches and doesn't touch. That's what I want to stay away from. Is I'm right there by the rifling, and I don't want it where half of them touch and half of them don't touch, and that could be all indicative on how much neck tension you got. And if it's harder to seat that bullet, well, guess what? That you measure that bullet, and to say you had the same bullet all the time, that bullet's not seated in the case as far as if it had less tension. So stay away, either stay in the rifling or stay off the rifling. Don't be trying to kiss it half the time and not half the time. And I think that gives you a whole lot of variables that you can't control, and you don't get good results from that, basically.
So is it fair to say that all of your bullets are either 10 in and 10 out? I mean, do you always stick with that?
Pretty much.
That is so crazy.
Or further, further out, depending on what shape the bullet is.
But you'll go 10. You'll go 10 thou every time.
That's 10's pretty simple.
That's crazy.
Yep. Now, don't go 20. And of course, a lot of people, what I typically do, I've got a stony point gauge, and of course, your throat wears to go a little further way down the road. And I can seat it. So if I was going to shoot for the whole season and I was going to load the load, I'd load it where it was, say, 30 thousandths long. And I get 2 things. Then I can stick the stony point gauge in there. Let's say I'm going to touch the rifling, measure what it is, and then I seat the bullet in to the depth of the day, so to speak, that I have measured.
So you're always 10 thou off. So as your barrel erodes, you're like, all right, I got to reset it, so I'm staying at 10.
And so I get 2 things. I get to reset it to a fresh, new, measured throat length. And secondly, I get, if the ammo sat around for a month and a half, then when I seat it, I've freshened up the neck too, because I pushed it in the bullet. So so it's going to release typically more uniformly. So,
interesting.
Because old ammo, if you took old ammo and you and you wait around for it sitting around for 5 years, well, it's going to have a lot of varying neck tension.
Is that because it's cold, what do they call it, cold welding or cold?
The galvanization or galvanic action a little bit, maybe.
Huh.
Yeah, sort of. Cold welding could be that. There's any number of ways to do that, yeah. So, and you might be ahead on that if you had it, is take a kinetic bullet puller and put a little, I know we're going way off here, put something that would stop the bullet so you couldn't knock it out of the kinetic bullet puller. But you hit it 2 or 3 times and the bullet, say it moved out 50 thousandths, and you go back and then you seat it back in to the prescribed depth you want.
Just to kind of break it free.
And it makes it, it's kind of like refreshing the neck.
So the kinetic bullet puller is the hammer. It looks like a hammer. You screw the bullet in there, the case in there, and you whack it on the floor, and it throws the bullet out and empties the case. Interesting. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've gotten a load tested, we've got some groups. What happens? I've had this all the time where I get a test. I pick a load, I do a test, I find a seating depth that really likes, and then I'm getting great SDs and crappy groups, and then I get a great group and a crappy SD. What gives?
Well, is it temperature insensitive powder? First thing.
H4350, H1000.
Okay, H1000.
I would think
probably
that H4350 and H1000 are pretty good.
That's right. Probably not. The other thing I would check is I would check my firing pin spring, but let's assume it's a new gun, so we could eliminate that. Oh, you got me stumped
I'm
here
just
for
a crappy
second.
shooter. Okay.
Yeah, you know, did you do it during the day? And when did you clean your gun last? You know, when you clean your gun.
I don't clean my gun.
Okay. Well, that could be part of it too. You know.
Okay.
A little carbon buildup or copper fouling.
Well, let's assume that it's the first 200 rounds of the gun.
And that's it. You know, if you have a little too tight a neck here, the thing I would tell you, if you're not going to clean your gun, is to at least get a bore brush and a short cleaning rod section where you can clean the neck of your chamber each and every day. That is a huge deal because we said that little brass.
Just the chamber, not the rifling.
That's right, just the chamber. And that little brass flow into the ejector plunger on the back after 50 rounds, it's because your neck doesn't have anywhere to go because it's got enough carbon buildup, it's causing pressure problems.
So let me ask you this. So let's say I'm shooting groups and I've got 3 or 4 shots I'm going to shoot. Do I want to let the thing cool? Do I want to shoot those as quick as possible? Because you throw the first one in, you shoot the first one, and then once you get 3 in the same hole, the fourth one you're like waiting forever, trying to get I got to get this perfect so I don't screw it up.
Well, it depends if it's a stress relieved barrel or not. All factory barrels typically are not stress relieved, i.e., they're cheaper to make. Okay, and so when they heat up, they kind of have to move around. Whereas a nice Schneider hand lap barrel, you shoot the thing 20 shots and it'll never have a point of impact change. Either if it's a heavyweight barrel or it's a lightweight barrel. It doesn't wander around.
Interesting. Okay, so we found a great load. We love it, whatever. Let's talk about annealing. Let's talk about how do you clean your brass. What's your process after you've shot 100 of them?
Sure, I'd take them home right out and I'd throw them in my case tumbler and I'd run them with some corn cob, fresh corn cob.
Corn cob,
yeah, corn cob.
Don't like stainless steel?
No, I like corn cob because I haven't punched the primers. Okay? I mean, if you really want to go to that depth, you can do that, but I didn't punch the primer, so I threw it in the corn cob. And when I ran a few hours, and then I went back through and I decapped them at that point in time.
Are you just decapping? You're not sizing?
No, I'm sizing and decapping at the same time.
You don't anneal before?
I don't anneal before.
You're kidding.
I hardly ever anneal,
what?
And I see no reason to anneal if you're pushing the bullet into the rifle. Because why do you anneal? So you'll have uniform neck tension. Well, if you push it in the rifling, it doesn't really matter how much the neck tension is because you're mitigating that. Now I've got enough to hold the bullet. I've got enough to hold the bullet when I extract it. Okay, but when you push it in the rifling with the stuff I shoot, the neck tension's not as big a deal as you may think. If you're jumping them, absolutely, it makes a difference. Okay.
Oh man, this is gonna get now. I'm like all perturbed here.
Yep.
You're gonna have to explain that. Okay, it's gonna get deep, folks. Just so.
Well, there's a lot of people anneal and they like the new fresh brass approach and so on and so forth. But if you're working off of the bullet touching, and
So if you're not jamming them, anneal.
If you're not jamming them, an annealing would be just fine.
Okay.
Now, of course,
if you're jamming them, you don't need to.
You don't really need to.
Are you jamming more often than not?
I jam more often than not.
I feel like it's a personal question, but
no, it is. No, no. No, it is.
Jammer.
You know, well, you think about it, because I just said, you know, you go back out and you might find when you jam it, you might find that you jammed at 7 or you jammed at 15, because obviously, depending on the lead that's in the barrel, sometimes it's easier to push them in further than you need to, or push them in further than maybe not than you need to, but you can push them in further than you think you can. Depending on 1.5 degree lead, it feels like you hit a brick wall. 3/4 degree lead, it's not. It's very hard to figure out where it's hitting the rifle.
All depends on the reamer that they use.
That's right. It does. It makes a great deal of difference. But I'm a firm believer, the closer I can get the bullet shapes that I shoot to the rifling, the better the groups. Okay?
So you're going to actually cut your chamber based on you're going to have a different reamer based on the shape of the bullet.
Right. Of course, a lot of it has to do with the free bore, the straight section. Yeah, but that's typically what I'm doing there, because this is primarily the bullet that I shoot everywhere, you know, and it's very forgiving. Now, will it shoot good groups jumping? Yeah, you can shoot. My parameter is I'm shooting prone, sling, scope, 1,000 yards, and let's say I'm shooting 10-shot groups, and I'm interested in the vertical component to it, not the horizontal. Let me get rid of this phone call. So at that point in time, when I shoot it, I can only hold probably 2 or 3 inches at 1,000 yards.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Because that's your sport. That's your
thing. But yeah. And so if I can shoot a group that's, say, 4 inches tall for 10 shots with the bullet touching the rifling, and if I take it off the rifling, I'll shoot a 5 or 6 inch group, vertically tall. Maybe 7, depends on the gun today. But I get better groups, better vertical groups when the bullet's touching. And so consequently, that kind of eliminates the need to anneal, in my opinion. Okay?
That is interesting. You always get a different take coming over here.
Yeah. But it's, you just got to be careful. You can change your neck tension and so on and so forth, but I don't have a lot of neck tension. And you can
What are you running neck tension wise?
Somewhere between 1 and 2.
Really? Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
And are you, so let's talk about neck tension for a second. So obviously, in order to do that, you've got to have a bushing die. And I think a lot of guys that get started in reloading, they go buy the $60, $70, $80 horny redding die, and they're not getting a neck bushing die where you're able to control that neck tension. Obviously, that's going to vary based on the kind of brass you have. So, what's kind of your take on those neck bushings? Obviously, David, one of his dies actually they don't just have a bushing for the neck, but they actually do the shoulder at the same time. So maybe you could touch on neck tension.
Well, when you shoot it, you should measure it. I want a chamber that when I shoot the case and I come back with the bullets that I'm shooting and I drop, let it go, it falls in the case. That's the first parameter. So that means I have a very large neck diameter. So I come back and I size it back. It's going to size back slightly smaller than I really want it to be. And then I'm going to run it through an expander mandrel, which will open it up. And at that point in time, the different diameters of the mandrels, I have no problem sizing it over resizing, let's say, going a thou or two smaller, because I'm going to go to the next station and run a mandrel through it that's going to size the IB of it back to where I want.
Inside diameter.
And typically, you don't overwork the neck. The fact that I expanded mine, I had 5 thousandths of side clearance, and then I moved it back so it was a thou inside, less bullet diameter, and then ran a mandrel in it. I don't get splits in my neck from that.
Interesting. How many firings are you getting out of like a 6?
Well, if I'm decently careful pushing it back 3 or 4 thousandths, then I don't see any reason that you can't get 30 firings. I've shot some of them 30 times. It's so long that you go, well, I don't know if I'd like to have a new piece of brass. So, yeah.
Cool. Wow.
Anyway,
well, we love coming here and drinking from the well of wisdom over here with all the experience.
I don't do everything that's conventional, but just what works for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you're on a whole nother level, but it's fun to kind of sit down and drink from that well of wisdom, as I say. So cool. We're gonna do a couple more videos with David on some different topics. Definitely check out his website, davidtubb.com.
davidtubb.com.
Correct. One of the things we kind of talked about for a second there was his muzzle brake. It's a fantastic brake design. One interesting thing about it that's kind of got me intrigued is the ability to tune it. So being able to do a little less monkey business in load development and just kind of get it close, and then use this muzzle brake to kind of tune it. So what that doing is kind of changing where the weight is on the barrel, and really just tuning in your harmonics and getting that thing to group well. So that's impressive. Cool. Got a couple of things to talk to you about too with him. He's got this a new trimmer coming out that's going to put the ring on the bullets, which crazy, amazing concept there. So we'll do another video about that. But thanks again, David. Appreciate it.
Thank
Always
you,
a
Bryce.
pleasure.
Sure.
Hoping to go down and do some shooting with him down in Texas, and can do some ELR too. So check this guy out. So here at SHOT Show 2016, got Todd McGee from Dead Air Armament.
Hi, I'm Kelly McMillan here.
We're gonna give it a shot right now.